Okay, now it's fine. Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we are going to talk about tumors in the oral cavity, especially cancer. Cancer means bad things. Cancer is dangerous, and cancer is something which causes a lot of harm. Which is true to some extent. And for that reason, we should be knowing the basics in the management of oral and maxillofacial tumors, especially with respect to cancers. And right from the patient enters your OPD till the patient has a treatment plan in place, it's the responsibility of the clinicians to make sure that whatever they prescribe to these patients is according to global standardization of treatment. So I thank you, Chirag, Parth, and my colleagues, now, first students and then now colleagues, to give me an opportunity. And I welcome Dr. Shakti, a very, very good reconstructive and head and neck maxillofacial surgeon from Ahmedabad also. So we'll try our best to help all of you. And at the end of both the talks, probably, Chirag and team can take questions and then we can, proceed from there. All right. So let's start. So this is something very funny, so whenever some patient comes to us and we do not have any idea, like, what is it about, we try to beat around the bush. So this patient is asking, the brain tumor is incurable. So the doctor says, I can give you something for your dandruff, So, which is totally not related. The patient's concern in cases of oral cancers is a non-healing ulcer. And you will not believe that most of our patients, especially in the Asian subcontinent, these patients who come to us, they come to us at an advanced stage just because of the fact that somebody doing general practice or somebody who is a physician or whoever, somebody who doesn't knows or who has a little less knowledge about these non-healing ulcers, was giving them a prolonged dose of multivitamins, a prolonged dose of what you call it, some kind of antioxidants, and a prolonged dose of all kind of things for that matter. So when you're talking about head and neck cancers, what are we talking about? See, head and neck is a very, very vast stream. Let me tell you that. So head and neck has got various subsites in that area. So we are talking about oral cancers, oral and maxillofacial tumors. We are talking about orbit and orbital tumors. We are talking about the voice box tumors. We're talking about thyroid tumors. We are also talking about skull-based tumors. Not to forget about tumors of the skin of the face. So it's a very vast field, but being into maxillofacial surgery, we usually deal with salivary gland tumors, sinonasal tumors, orbital, as well as the scalp tumors. So we will not go into all those things. We'll restrict our talk to oral cancers and oral and maxillofacial cancers so that at the end of the talk, most of us do understand the basic guidelines how to manage these tumors. So we have a patient who comes to us sometimes with a lesion, sometimes with a biopsy, or sometimes both, Obviously, he has a lesion and that's why he has a biopsy. So how to approach such patients? So first thing is that you have to yourself stay calm and assure the patient. When a doctor herself or himself is not calm, the patient becomes uncalmed 10 times. Okay, so we usually get calls from different doctors all over India. Doctor, I got a patient, he's got cancer, and the patient is just in front of these people, which is very, very scary for the patient. So you have to be very calm, you have to be very polite, you have to be very kind of peaceful in making them understand there is a problem which can be addressed, and this problem needs to be addressed as soon as possible. So staying calm is very, very important. Chirag, still this waiting room is right in the center. I can't see much in my slides, because of this. You have to, plus I can hear all the notifications. Can you do something about it? if possible. So when we treat these patients, what are we looking at? So whenever you treat cancer patients, you have to follow certain guidelines. Now, where are these guidelines available? Well, they are available on the web. They are available on the sites, which are standardized sites for the management of oral cancers or head and neck tumors like NCCN and all those things. You have to look at articles which are multicentric trials, basically a level 1 evidence or a level 2 evidence, which talks about formulating the treatment modalities in various pre-malignant and malignant lesions of the oral cavity and the maxillofacial region. It's very unfair that we have been taught in such a way that we believe that whatever books we were told to go through had abundance of literature, knowledge, and we should just follow them blindly. Well, it's totally wrong. Most of the authors, which have written those books are dead. Like they don't even exist, and these are upgraded by some agency or whatever, who knows who upgrades them. And most of the times, the textbooks which were written long term back or a long time back, they are very, very kind of insufficient when you talk about the modern day management of tumors. So always supplement these textbooks with literature which is available freely on the internet, or ask the experts who are doing these tumor cases day in, day out. There are a few doctors who have dedicated themselves to the treatment of oral cancers or oral and maxillofacial oncology. You can give them a call, you can mail them, you can send the reports. And these are the people whose words you can take it for, seriously rather. The others, I do not believe, we were just discussing for that matter, you cannot do a tooth extraction probably in the morning and do a tumor in the evening. You have to be 100% dedicated. You have to be 200%, your mind, your body, your soul, all has to be totally involved when we are talking about patients with head and neck cancers. So what are the different aspects of these head and neck cancers? See, I'm not going to talk about anything which is boring, which is outdated, which is written or blah, 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 because I myself don't like those things, and they have changed, most of them. So I'll be only talking about the clinical aspects of these cancers. I'll be talking about things which actually make a difference, so that you can put all these things in your practice and help your patients accordingly. So what are these things? So in the history, for example, what is most important in the history? So whenever you take a history, you have been taught, ask the patient, where does he live, what does he do, and all that. See, when you're talking about a history of a patient who has a non-healing ulcer or a lesion or a swelling or a lump in the neck or whatever, this history is not important. Where does he live? Probably to some extent when we are talking about occupational cancers. Oral cavity usually doesn't has an occupational cancer as such, they are definitely not with respect to stress. But per se, arsenic and wood and all, they mostly cause nasopharyngeal tumors or oropharyngeal tumors or lung cancers or laryngeal cancers. So with respect to smoke, I'm talking about. So when you talk about oral cancers, the history has to be, and you have a patient having a lesion, history has to be very crisp. You have to ask about the habits, which is very, very important. Habits per se are one of the most important things when you're taking the history. In the habits, the history, what type of consumption he has, what is the frequency of that consumption, and since how long he's been doing that. This is all very, very important. And what comes next? The comorbidities. Is he diabetic? Is he immunosuppressive? Is he a COPD patient? Is he a heart patient? Is he having a renal disorders and where is serum creatinine, and is he on dialysis? See, all these patients, and obviously the socioeconomic status, all these patients usually somehow will be immunosuppressed. And because they are immunosuppressed, what is the chance that because their immunity is less, they are more prone to get these cancers. All right. So then we come to examination point of it. So there are two types of, when you talk about oral cancers, you have an intraoral and the extraoral examination. You have inspection and palpation. So what about intraoral examination? Please do remember, when you're examining, examining any kind of a patient with a non-healing ulcer, you have to remember that you have to divide the oral cavity into different subsets. You have to check the lips separately, you have to check the buccal mucosa separately, you have to check the retromolar trigone separately, you have to check the anterior 2/3 of the tongue separately, you have to check the posterior 1/3 of the tongue separately, you have to check the hard palate separately, and you have to check the soft palate and the pharynx or the oropharynx separately. So never just because you are tired or you are just not interested, you just tend to put the light in the mouth, and most of the times you cannot see properly also, and you just go and just say, okay, you have nothing. Spend at least 5 to 10 minutes in looking at some kind of an anomaly or an abnormality, which can be a lump, which can be a ulcer, non-healing ulcer, or any kind of deviation from the normal. All right. So this is a very nice YouTube video which I found out for examination of the neck. We teach in a medical college, so a lot of times we see this, that people do not basically know how to examine the neck. So some people just put the hands here, some people will go behind and put the hands, some people will go with their hands straight into the neck. So just we'll have a look.
Sir, you will have to screen share that particular screen.
Can you see the video?
No.
Okay, one second.
In screen share option, select on the YouTube, like the whatever you're using, Internet Explorer or Google Chrome or whatever.
Okay, let's see if I can share this. You can't see this?
No, sir.
Okay, probably in the end, probably, yeah. Chirag. Okay, let's just remind me, yeah? All right. Fair enough. So this part, what are you examining in the neck? So you are examining basically the different levels of lymph nodes. All right. So neck has got roughly 7 levels of neck nodes, right from level 1A to 1B to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. So when you're talking about oral cancers per se, we are most keen in level 1, 2, 3 and 4. Level 5 nodes, most of the oral cancers hardly go there. The evidence, whatever evidence we have, the supraclavicular or the level 5 nodes, which is just posterior to the sternocleidomastoid or the posterior triangle or whatever you call it, there is only a 1% to 1.5 to 2% chances that these nodes do get involved with oral cancers. So our area of interest usually remains level 1, 2 and 3. Although when we operate these patients, we do clear level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all. Level 6 are the midline nodes, which are usually the paratracheal nodes or nodes which are related to your thyroid gland. So usually when you're doing thyroid cancers, you basically try to clear the central compartment. The central compartment, meaning the compartment that is between your two carotids on both the sides. So, or the laryngeal cancers, when you have cancers of the larynx. So sometimes these laryngeal cancers do go to the level 6 nodes and you have to clear them with a functional neck dissection. Very important thing, which whenever I'm told to come to meetings, I'm grilled over it. Biopsy, we have this very unfortunately wrong thing taught to us that biopsy should be taken with the excisional biopsy or incisional. What type of biopsy should be taken first of all? See, when you're talking about non-healing ulcers, the best way to take a biopsy is only and only incisional biopsy. Now, whether you take it with a knife or if you have a beautiful instrument such as a punch, which I have put it as a picture, you can use this punch forceps because it's very easy. It is very non-expensive. It just hardly costs around $800 or whatever, $100 or not $100, I think $10 or $15, $20. So this instrument is a phenomenal instrument. You just identify the area of the concern. Now, how to identify from where to take a biopsy and how to take a biopsy. So ideally, if it's an ulcerated ulcero-infiltrative lesion, you can use a knife, but do not take a normal mucosa. Just go in the area which is most undifferentiated. which looks very, very unhealthy, go deep and take a nice bite into that area and just submit it, put it in the formalin. The ratio should be 20 times the tissue. All right. So this is how you should match it, and then send it for histopathology. Punch biopsy, why it should not have the normal mucosa? Because when you take the normal mucosa into your biopsy, and when a surgeon excises that, you've already taken a part of the normal mucosa in your biopsy. So, for example, you have taken 3 millimeter of normal mucosa and the edge of the tumor. There is no clinical sense, according to me and according to people all over the world, who operate these tumors, that we do not want to see the normal mucosa. You do not want to see whether the other side is involved or not, because as it is, you're going to later on when you operate these patients, you're going to do the frozen section. You're going to have 1 centimeter margin all around the tumor in all dimensions. So there is no sense of taking the normal mucosa. This has been put in a head, I don't know I don't know who, probably whoever, but this is a very, very wrong practice. You'd never take normal mucosa because it does not help. You just go and do a punch biopsy with a punch or do a knife. You never do an excisional biopsy for a tumor which looks sinister, because if you do an excisional biopsy, first of all, if it's a malignant tumor, it will bleed a lot. So you are in a deep, deep kind of a situation where in your clinic you do not have a monopolar cautery or a bipolar cautery, and you cannot control that bleeding, and finally you have to call someone. So always take a punch biopsy or an incisional biopsy, go deep nicely, take a small amount of tissue in an area which looks undifferentiated, which does not look good. And this is how you should do it. What type of anesthesia should be given? Next question. See, whatever I am telling you according to some guidelines. So please, if you have pen and paper or whatever, just keep writing all these things, because it will help you, and at least you can help many patients. Infiltration. Never give local infiltration around the tumor. Why? Because basically you're pushing. For example, your suspicious lesion is a carcinoma in situ. So when you inject with pressure, you're actually pushing these cells into the subepithelial layers in the connective tissue. So you might, by default, cause an upgrade of the tumor. And as a result, when a surgeon operates these tumors, you have to go much deeper at a much lower level to excise them. So better way, there are 2 ways to do a biopsy. One is the spray, and the other is a regional block, loco-regional block. As maxillofacial surgeons, we know all the bloody blocks, these blocks can be used and the whole area can be anesthetized. So what is the problem? You can anesthetize the lingual nerve, you can anesthetize the lingual, whatever lingual nerve, you can anesthetize inferior alveolar nerve. Once you do a pterygomandibular nerve block or a posterior superior alveolar nerve block or a infraorbital nerve block, you can easily take a biopsy. This was about the biopsy. Now the one important question that I am asked many times, and probably for past 10 years, what should you do? Should we divide the sample? You should never divide your sample, because when you divide your sample, you have 2 friends, Tina and Meena, or whatever, X and Y. You send one part to one person, the other part to another person. What actually is happening? What are you doing? Basically, you're dividing your biopsy sample. You're sending to 2 people. Ultimately, one will report it as a squamous cell carcinoma, the other will report it as hyperplasia. You're again in a soup. So always send the full sample to one clinician. It does not matter whether it's an oral pathologist, it does not matter if it's a general pathologist. Just send the whole thing. Do not divide your sample and try to impress just because he was your classmate or a batchmate to 4 people. You're dividing it. You are dividing the sample, you will get different diagnosis. And you will not be able to treat this patient. You have to call this patient again and again, do a biopsy. So always send the full specimen. Yes, once the report comes and you're not satisfied with the report, what you can do is send the slides for review. That you can do because the slides are already made. So slides can be sent for a second opinion to see whether the pathologist, the previous pathologist, has missed onto something. But never divide your sample. This was about it. So whenever these patients with a non-healing ulcer, oh sorry, I forgot. When should you take a biopsy? Any ulcer that does not heal for more than 3 weeks. max 4 weeks, you should go in and take a biopsy. Do not keep on treating these patients with antioxidants, multivitamins. Basically, if it's a cancer, you are basically helping the cancer to grow technically. So ultimately, you're not doing anything. You're just wasting the time of the patient. The patient is going to have more wider infiltration, more deeper infiltration, and that will ultimately result probably in a bigger operation later on. So don't keep the patients for 2 months. There is no ulcer which remains for 2-3 months unless it's a tuberculous ulcer or a syphilitic ulcer or blah blah. Other kind of you can say connective tissue disorders, which are very very rare in the oral cavity. So only thing that is not healing and you're giving whatever antioxidants and multivitamins, please think about cancer. And 3 weeks, we recommend 3 weeks is the time when you should call somebody or yourself take a biopsy of these patients. So what should I do, doctor? I have taken the biopsy. What else should I write? Write the routine blood investigation. What should I write? LFT, RFT? No, you have to write what is most important, because see, you're preparing the patient for surgery technically if it comes out to be positive. So you can write routine blood, CBC, Triple H, LFT, RFT, X-ray chest, CT, MRI, depending on the subsite of the tumor. See, again, let me be very clear. What investigation, what scan is very, very important. And this is the reason why we are having this talk. So different subsets will require different kind of, scans or MRIs or whatever. For example, one second. Chirag, again, my slides are not moving. Can you just see? So for example, we are having a lesion in the buccal mucosa, all right? So buccal mucosa tumor, thank you. So buccal mucosa, this is a phenomenal paper by Dr. Suprit Arya from Tata Memorial and Dr. Prathamesh sir. It came out and they spoke about different subsites. You can take a picture, you can read this. It's a phenomenal article. I love this article because it talks about different subsites. It talks about the imaging modalities in these different subsites, in different subsite group of patients. And what does it talk about? In short, I'll just tell you. So if it's a buccal mucosa cancer or buccal mucosa ulcer, CT scan, puff cheek view is the best option. Okay, don't write OPG. It does not make sense. Why you're asking for an OPG? The tumor is just in the buccal mucosa. Now, if it is a buccal mucosa tumor coming into the gingivobuccal sulcus, still don't write OPG because it does not help you. OPG does not tell us about the soft tissue. Please remember that. You have to order a CT scan because you want to see the tumor and its relationship to the bone, as well as you will be able to see the soft tissue involvement. So when the surgeon is planning the surgery, I don't have to send the patient again for a CT scan. What type of CT scan? CT scan with contrast, CT scan, puff cheek view with contrast, along with neck or plus minus neck, it's your choice. What is the best option for neck? See, there have been different trials, there have been different multicentric studies. Most of them have compared ultrasonography with CT, with MRI. My personal opinion is ultrasonography is one of the best modality according to sensitivity and specificity, but there is always a difference of opinion. So somebody will say CT scan, that's okay. Whatever it is, the difference is not much. The only disadvantage of ultrasonography is it's a second procedure, so patient has to pay more. On the other hand, when you're doing an oral cavity CT, you can at the same time do the neck CT, so you save some money there. One more disadvantage of ultrasonography when you're talking about neck nodes is it will only take up the superficial nodes, say 5 millimeter, probably 6 millimeter, but anything deeper will not be picked up. But yes, it is very sensitive, it is very specific. So ultrasonography for the neck, buccal mucosa subsite, CT scan, bucco-gingivobuccal sulcus, CT scan, bone involvement, CT scan. Now, if the tumor is in the floor of the mouth or tumor is in the tongue, what is the doctor best option? What should I order? You have to order an MRI. For tongue tumors, MRI is the best option. MRI will give you a better signal. MRI will tell you all about the dimensions. And the most important thing about MRI, which it's going to tell you is, it's going to tell you the depth of the tumor. So actually, you can plan your treatment according to the depth, because in the latest classification, which I'll show you, the depth of the tumor has become an integral part of AJCC 8th edition TNM classification. So you can go online, it's there in my presentation, and you can basically just click pictures or probably download yourself. Now it's no more the old one. So whenever you're saying it's T1, N0, M0, you have to tell according to the latest AJCC 8th edition. All right, so that is one thing. So according to subsite, according to the area. Now, for example, it's a hard palate tumor. What should I do? MRI or CT scan? Do a CT because you want to know the bone. So whenever the question comes of whether you want to see the resorption pattern in bone or not, it's better to do a CT. In tongue, there is no bone. Now you have a condition where probably the tumor is so big that it's going from tongue to floor of mouth, reaching right up to the alveolus. Then probably one investigation is more than enough, because in our country people have problem of spending money. So CT scan again becomes okay for this patient, or an MRI. Both are okay, that's fine. But talking about different subsets, whenever you want to see the resorption, whenever you want to see anything related to bone, CT is better. Although the marrow signals that we get from the bone are better when we do an MRI. So whenever you write a CT scan for cheek, for gingivobuccal sulcus, you have to write CT scan, oral cavity with contrast, puff cheek, you wipe puff cheek. You tell the patient to put some air so that the buccal mucosa goes away from the gingivobuccal sulcus, so you do not see artifacts in the scan. All right, you don't see the tumor which is in buccal mucosa is also in the bone. So when patient holds the breath, it helps us to differentiate the subsite. What if the tumor is in the retromolar trigone? If the tumor is in the retromolar trigone, again, you will go for a CT scan with contrast plus minus ultrasonography of the neck. I always do for my patients ultrasonography as a different modality, but if you want the same thing, see, whenever you're talking about oral cancers, you have to think about two things: the primary site where the tumor is, and the secondary site where metastasis is expected. So all oral cancers do metastasize to the neck, to the different levels. So there has to be a treatment or a imaging modality for the neck. There has to be an imaging modality for the primary site. So this is how it goes. Chirag, next style, please. Okay, so when we are talking about all these cancers, we spoke about little clinic. We have to go a little bit in theory and try to understand, what it is all about. So just remember, Chirag, you have to, one second, I'm sorry. Okay, so what is it? When you talk about neoplasia, what is it? Basically means a new growth, a growth which was not there and now it's there. So by definition, an old definition, it just means an abnormal mass or a new growth which was not present there and now is the next slide. Chirag, you have to give me the control. I think that's better. Okay. So whenever you're talking about cancers, you have two components. You have an epithelial component and you have a parenchymal component, or the connective tissue component. If the cancer is in the epithelia, it can be a squamous cell carcinoma in situ, or it can be a very superficial T1 lesion. But if the cancer is deeper, it is gone into the submucosal level, then obviously it upgrades itself and gets classified as probably a T2 or a T3 tumor, depending upon the depth, probably what we see on an MRI or a CT, and ultimately has to be treated in a different way. So all tumors have two components, unless it's a very, very superficial tumor, it's just in the epithelium, probably a carcinoma in situ, or just a very early T1 lesion. All right, so we have to think about both the tumors. So this is a terminology, I'll not go into this. So whenever your oral pathologist or a general pathologist talks about cancer, he's looking at these things, pleomorphism, nucleocytoplasmic ratio, the ratio of the nucleus and the cytoplasm. So you see hyperchromatism, basically. You see a lot of hyperchromatic granules, nucleosis. You see abnormal mitotic figures, and on this basis, he will give you a diagnosis. Now, what is this? Doctor, I have got a patient who has a well-differentiated carcinoma, and who has a moderately differentiated carcinoma, and who has a poorly differentiated. What does all this mean? See, basically, it tells you about the prognosis of the patient on a long term. They will all be treated mostly, especially the well differentiated and moderately, most of the times, almost the same way. But poorly differentiated tumors increase the risk of metastasis, increase the risk of long-term survival rates, they reduce it, and also should be treated more aggressively. So when you have a biopsy saying it's a moderately differentiated or a especially poorly differentiated, you know that this patient will require a more aggressive therapy. Now I get this, again I get calls, I have small nodule patient having a nodule in the mouth, it is benign or malignant. It's very simple, just go on these points. Just see whether it's well circumscribed, just see the size, just see the duration, and look at the peduncle. Usually the pedunculated masses which are freely mobile, there is no pain associated, they are benign. On the other hand, if you have something which is indurated, which is thick, which is looking red or reddish white, which has suddenly grown in size, which has caused some kind of numbness, think malignant about it. All right. So this is a small thing. I just wanted to show you the load of, just have a look. See the lip and the oral cavity. This is the index from a government source. So we have around 1 lakh plus cases, around 1,20,000 cases in India alone. I mean, I'm not talking about Asia. So 1,20,000 cases alone in the country is a very big number. I'm just talking about oral cancers, oral and lip. I'm not talking about head and neck. Probably they are more than 30%. So these oral cancer, 1 lakh patients, I don't think so. We are treating even 1/3 of them. We might be treating probably 20% or 30%. So what's happening to the rest? God knows. Because these patients don't reach us. They are whatever referred to places which are very, very busy already, or they have no time or whatever, and they have this self-belief that if we go there, we'll get cured. It's not like that. You have to reach a person who can cure you. You have to reach a person who can take this cancer out safely without causing more harm, who's trained to do it. Now, secondly, what is the distribution of oral cancers in India? So you will be surprised that, most of us are right-handed. So the left buccal mucosa is the most common site. So mostly in India, we get gingivobuccal sulcus or the buccal mucosa left side, or an RMT or tongue. Floor of mouth and all is quite rare. What is the overall size? See, all this is very, very important. This is not what I am saying. These are all meta-centric, multicentric trials which were conducted. And this is what the truth is. So even if it's a localized cancer, you have a very good 59 to 60% survival rate after 5 years. Now, if it's a localized cancer which has gone to the neck, then the survival rate reduces. So before it goes to the neck, you're supposed to help these patients. You have to do all the things needed, which I have told you, and refer them ASAP. I'll not go into all this. This is all too much. In my practice, probably, in past 8-9 years, most of my patients who have come to me primary or secondary were having the history of tobacco chewing. So any kind of gutka, pan, mishri, whatever, XYZ things, these things remain in contact with the mucosa, and ultimately, they become carcinogenic, and ultimately these result in formation of ulcer. For that matter, many of the people who chew them, you will be shocked to know, they sleep in the night, by keeping them in the vestibule or whatever. So keeping the thing in the vestibule is a very, very risky thing, and ultimately they do land up with cancer. Is nicotine responsible for cancer? No. So what is responsible for cancer? Cancer is caused by 30 components which are present in tobacco. Few I'll just name: nitrosamines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and there are many like these, So these are the things which will cause cancer. Nicotine itself, no, because otherwise, when we keep patients on cessation, we prescribe them nicotine lozenges and chewing gum, they themselves might have caused cancer. So it is basically the aromatic compound groups and the nitrosamines and the benzyl amines and all those things, roughly around 28-30, which are responsible for causing cancer. So these are the different types of cancers. Cigarette smoking, oral cancer, less, but definitely have a role in oropharyngeal, laryngeal and lung cancers. Same with BD. I'll just go through this fast. This is very bad. This pan masala and mawa and all this, they are chewable, smokeless tobaccos. Kheni, Mishri. Okay, this is one thing which again I have, wherever I go to attend a party or whatever, they start asking me all this is, and they are doing, unfortunately they're doing at the same time. So smoking and drinking, it's a very, very, you can say, dangerous cocktail. See what's happening when you take alcohol, basically you're reducing the formation of saliva, number one, which is a protective mechanism. You are increasing the epithelial permeability of your oral mucous membrane. You're allowing the carcinogenic compounds present in the cigarette smoke to go in a deeper layer because the mucosa is permeable now. And on the contrary, if you're chronic alcoholic, you're already probably you're deficit by nutrition, your liver is kind of screwed, So all these things together will put you in a kind of a high risk. So ideally, you should not do both the things together, or for that matter, none. All right. So viruses, just remember one thing: for oral cancers, HPV. That's all. Rest all, Epstein-Barr in India and all that is not very common. HPV 16 and 18. If you want to send the patient sample for PCR and all that, they will tell you subside. But usually, oropharyngeal cancers are caused by human papilloma virus. If an oral cancer is caused by human papilloma virus, it's a good news, because these patients will do much better on a long-term basis than patients who have a history of consuming tobacco. Diet and nutrition, we all know about this. I'll just go for a small, table, and then probably we can take it from there. So what is happening? How does the cancer form? There's a big question. Oh my God, so much literature and all those things. See, a normal cell is continuously irritated. There is a damage to the DNA. There is mutation of the genes. And ultimately, once your cellular genes get mutated, there is activation of growth, or the growth promoting oncogenes. Okay. And there is a suppression of some cancer preventing oncogenes. So what is happening actually, the balance is getting diverted in favor of formation of a cancer. So there's an expression of the altered gene products, and ultimately which results in an uncontrolled growth and ultimately a tumor. So every cancer goes through two phases. There is promotion, basically the irritation and all that, and ultimately progression in size. All right, so I'll just remember, this is very important: P16 activation and 3P deletion. So P16 activation is a very important thing in formation of oral cancer. So what happens? See, is normal mucosa, squamous hyperplasia, ultimately developing dysplasia. So if, for example, you have a patient who had a non-healing ulcer or whatever, and you thought it's a cancer, you did a biopsy, it's dysplasia. What should you do? If you have a patient who had a red and white lesion, it comes out as dysplasia. Technically, you're supposed to operate this patient. Now here it comes, whether you can operate with the laser or not, whether you should use a cautery or not, whether you should. These are the early patients. Okay, lasers in oral cancers are only used for pre-malignant carcinoma in situ type of conditions. Laser is not some God's magic wand. Don't think that laser itself is something like induced radiotherapy or chemotherapy. So these lasers is basically just a kind of a pencil which kind of cuts tissue. Okay, but to a certain depth, 2 millimeter or 4, depending upon what laser you're using. So laser, because their depth is controlled, for superficial things you can use it. All right, probably for leukoplakia, I'll tell you when to exercise and what type to exercise. But for deep tumors, for proper T1, T2, you don't do all this. Okay, this is rubbish. You have to use a cautery, you have to do it properly, you have to take 1 centimeter of margin in all dimensions, including the base. All right. Okay, so this is fine. This is important for you. How does a cancer spread? So there is a local spread, there is spread through the nerves, there is spread through the vessels, there is direct spread through the spaces or the cavities. And how does it spread basically? It can spread in a center, it can have pushing fronts, or it can spread in any of the other directions. That's okay. So what happens in the oral cavity? See, oral cavity follows the same principles, or the cancers of the oral cavity follow the same principles as cancer of, probably as an infection. All right, so it will go to the path of least resistance. Fair enough. So what is that path of least resistance? Okay, so least resistance means, for example, you have a growth in the retromolar trigonal, right? So laterally from the, I'll show you by pictures, laterally its tumor is more likely to go laterally because there's nothing lateral, there's just buccinator. So if it is posterior to the attachment of buccinator, there's nothing to prevent it to go to the buccal space. So this tumor in the retromolar will go laterally to the buccal space. Now, if this tumor hasn't got any obstruction to go medially and the medial pterygoid is attached little posteriorly, it will go to the masticatory space. It will just go between the medial pterygoid and the ramus of the mandible. So it starts involving and the patient develops trismus. Okay, just forgot to tell you in the history, trismus, do ask for trismus. And in trismus, what is important is the duration of trismus. Trismus hairs, don't get excited. The thing is for how long. If it's a trismus which has just started and there is an ulcer in the RMT or there is an ulcer very close to the masticatory spaces, probably a posterior GB sulcus, that should ring bells. And you should understand this is a short duration trismus. So it cannot be something like submucosal fibrosis or something benign. If patient says, my mouth is not opening since a long time, probably for years, it's a good news. Long duration trismus, good news. Short duration trismus, scary news. Fair enough. Coming back to the spread of these tumors, from tongue, for example, you have a tongue cancer, there's no obstruction between tongue and the floor of mouth, technically, except for the genial muscles. All right. So once this border of genial muscles is crossed, when you're talking about downward spread, it can directly go to the sublingual space. Now, if sublingual space gets involved, your mylohyoid will get involved. If mylohyoid gets involved, your skin outside the mylohyoid will get involved. So, it's simple. It's basically the path of least resistance. And obviously, there are rich lymphatics which connect the oral cavity to the neck. So, this is the reason that patients having oral cancers have neck nodes, because these cancer cells are going to get deposited in the lymphatic system. And from the lymphatic system, they're going to go into the lymphatic system of the neck. That's why you do the neck dissection for it. Hematogenous spread, very interesting. Just see, mostly we see it in sarcomas or the connective tissue tumors. Oral cancers, we do see them, but if it's not a good news, because if there is a lymphovascular invasion or the tumor cells have already gone, there are high chances that these patients will develop long distance metastasis, either to the lungs or to the liver or to the bones or to the spine. So when you send your sample after surgery, which is called as the histopathology report, so something called as biopsy is the initial thing, and then something called as HPR, the histopathology report. So when you send this sample for the histopathology report, there is something known as LVI, lymphovascular invasion, which a histopathologist will tell you. So if the patient has LVI, that patient comes in the high risk, and as he's coming in high risk, it's very important to treat that patient with adjuvant therapy, okay, for the primary site. All right, I'll talk about it later. Just a diagram to show how it happens. You can click pictures, no problem. All right, so from there it comes to the base. These cells come to the basement membrane, and actually they cause damage to the endothelial cells, and from the main blood get attached. They have to get attached to something, either RBCs or the platelets. And once they get attached to something into the vascular system, they can go anywhere. That's the reason why an oral cancer will have a lung met. That's the reason why an oral cancer will have a spinal met. Okay, so don't be shocked next time. So this is the way oral cancers. In short, I'll tell you what happens in oral cancer. How does the mandible gets involved? So if you have a buccal mucosa tumor, so along the buccal mucosa, it will go up and it will enter the alveolar. See, it's very difficult for these tumors to enter directly because mandible is strong. So even if you have a gingivobuccal sulcus tumor, very rare, unless it's a very big and a long-standing and aggressive tumor, it will not cause erosion of the lateral cortex. It's strong. So what does it do? It climbs up and tries to go to the periodontal region or the medullary bone. So it goes from up. It goes up. So buccal mucosa becomes gingivobuccal sulcus, and ultimately it dips into the alveolus. This is how it happens. These are some pictures which tells you that. So same, if it's a maxilla, it can involve maxillary sinus. From the maxillary sinus, if it goes superiorly, it will involve the orbit. If it goes posteriorly or the posteromedially, it will cause involvement of the infratemporal fossa. If it goes Medially, it will involve the nose and the lateral wall of the nose. So it's very important to understand the origin of the tumor, right? So sometimes you feel, the origin is different and the extent is different. So you have to understand, look at the scans, come to a conclusion that actually where is the center of this tumor from which it has originated. All right, so this is the most common way it happens. All right, so alveolar mucosa, so a lower alveolus, so within the alveolus, then it involves the medullary spaces. Where once it enters the medulla, it will involve the nerve or the neurovascular bundle, and ultimately it can go distally, that is away from the midline, and or go proximally. Proximally along the nerve. So nerve, if you remember, V2, from where does it come out? You should know that. Ultimately, it can involve the infratemporal fossa, so RMT tumor, which has entered the bone, can cause a perineural invasion, and ultimately perineural invasion can take the tumor cells along at a higher level to involve the base of the skull. Okay, so this is how it happens. Okay, this is just it's a very important thing. The pre-malignant lesions. So this is a good paper which recently came out. So pre-malignant lesions, basically, what in very precise way I'll tell you. Okay, so this is what the disorders were classified in 2017. Remember, leukoplakia, erythroplakia, mixed leukoerythroplakia, submucosal fibrosis, smoker's palate, lupus, oral lichen planus, and cheilitis. Now, what is this leukoplakia? Which leukoplakia is dangerous? When should I take a biopsy? From where should I and when should we excise? Nodular leukoplakia which has increased in size, is thick. I'm sorry, some idiot, So leukoplakia which is thickened leukoplakia, you feel on palpation is nodular, and you feel, it is becoming painful, which it was not. This is the leukoplakia which is a scary leukoplakia. You might have to excise this or take a biopsy. How to take a biopsy? For leukoplakia, usually you do an excisional biopsy, all right? So you clear with a nice cautery or a laser or whatever you want with good 1 centimeter or minimum 5 millimeter margins. Erythroplakia, there are a lot of papers which tell us that erythroplakia, for that matter, 40 to 60% of these tumors do have squamous cell carcinoma in situ when they come to you. So these patients, you have to be very careful, keep on looking at them, call them after 2 months or 6 weeks, especially 5 to 6 weeks, and just see if there are any changes that are occurring. And whenever you feel suddenly it has increased in size or suddenly it's causing burning sensation, this is the time when you'll go in and take a biopsy. Excisional biopsy mostly, or you will plan for a proper surgery. Mixed lesions. Now I have people call and just ask, doctor, I have a red-white lesion. What should I? From where to take a biopsy? It's very simple. Don't take a biopsy from a white side. It's going to be benign. Always in a mixed lesion, take a biopsy from a red side, because red side is a sinister site. This is the site which is going to cause problems. All right. Submucosal fibrosis, very rare it will go into formation of oral cancer. Unless you develop something within the submucosal fibrosis which is ulcerative, do not bother much. These have to be treated by surgery, especially stage 3, stage 4 oral submucosal fibrosis. Khanna and Andrade 1992 article which talks about different modalities and the staging system of submucosal fibrosis. So what are the best ways to treat? Please understand, unless it's stage 1 and 2, your all injections, steroids and all hyaluronidase, all that blah blah is okay. It might help or it might not help, and nobody knows, everybody's happy. But once it is reduced mouth opening and the fibrous bands have already formed and developed, do not keep on injecting them unnecessarily. They need a nasolabial flap. They need surgery. Whoever tells you anything, it will not work. Once the level, once it goes to stage 3, 4 or whatever, 4A, 4B, he classified into different types. That time, no form of conservative management is going to help these patients. So you have to take them for surgery. Now this is something different. So they have found out, now this after 2017, these 4 have been added, So hyperplastic candidosis, lichenoid reactions, so all of them have roughly 2% chances of having squamous cell carcinoma over a period of 10 to 15 years. Just keep them under observation. Look for any kind of change in the symptoms the patient is telling you. Suddenly the patient says, I was not feeling burning, now I'm feeling burning. Since suddenly the pain is there, or suddenly the lesion is looking more fiery red and it was not looking. That is the time when you'll go in and do a biopsy or some kind of excision. Right. So these are some kind of red and white lesions and some cancers. Okay, so this is a leukoplakia. All right, again, this is a squamous cell carcinoma. This is typical thing when you have a cheek bite, to see this ulcerated lesion. And I'm telling you frankly, a lot of patients come to me because doctors are giving them multivitamins and all blah blah. This is not going to help. This is a proper ulcerated lesion in the retromolar trigone. It needs a biopsy. It is not going to heal very soon unless at an early stage and you have removed the irritating factor. That is the last tooth probably. It's not going to heal. Okay, it's a fully developed lesion now. You have to go in and take a punch biopsy or an eye biopsy. These are the symptoms. Okay, so you have to be careful about them. These are the subsites. All right, different subsites. Okay, just have a look. People who have not seen many cancers, just have a look. Cancers always look like this. These are more of exophytic pictures, what I am showing you. Sometimes they are also infiltrative. So, there is a submucosal part which is more predominant for these lesions. All right. So how do you detect them? The question sometimes asked, should I do toluidine blue staining? What is Wellscope? What is immunofluorescence? Please understand one thing. The best thing to diagnose any kind of oral lesion is a biopsy. There's nothing better than that. Next thing, if you don't have a knife, if you live in a forest and you have no knife, or you do not have a punch forceps, the next option which is closest is probably a fluoroscope. All right. So, but there is not till date, there is no convincing evidence that fluoroscope or toluidine blue is better than anything. Very primitive camps which are conducted on mountains and probably deep forests and in areas where instrumentation is not possible. Exfoliative cytology is the next best thing. You can just use a brush border thing. With a brush you can just push the brush in the lesion and you will get some cells, and you can send these cells to the pathologist and he can or she can tell you what it is. Radiographs we have already discussed. FNAC I want to talk about a little bit and then probably I'll end it. FNAC, please remember one thing. When do you do an FNAC? You have a patient who has nothing in the oral cavity. So you have a node, okay, enlarged node. You put the patient, enlarged node can be due to inflammation, can be due to benign, can be a malignant, okay, or can be something like an immunosuppressive or whatever. So these patients, you should know why the node has enlarged. All right. So you keep the patient on antibiotics, you keep the patient on analgesics, and basically you wait and watch for the node to settle down. Now this node doesn't settle down. Okay, it just increases more in size. Fair enough. So what to do? So first thing you will do for an enlarged node is an ultrasonography. So when you write an ultrasonography, please remember that map the lymph nodes. Do not write USG and you think you know everything. USG, he will just tell you, okay, thyroid gland is normal, lymph nodes are normal. He will not tell you. The ultrasonologist will not tell you what. He will not understand what do you mean. So what is going to tell you? Carotid is present, vein, internal jugular vein is present, nodes are there. Obviously, everybody has lymph nodes, and nothing clinically significant comes out of it. So what is the thing you have to mention? Whenever you want a neck mapping, you have to write, kindly do the mapping of lymph nodes on both the sides. All right, both the sides. So when you map it, it comes as reactive, it comes as intermediate, it comes as suspicious, it comes as malignant. So for example, this patient, you suspect something in the oral cavity. Okay, there is a lesion and he has an enlarged node, and you have not done a biopsy, and probably you want to know because you rather biopsy and have a primary diagnosis. Or the other way around, you just have a node which is not resolving. So what you will do, the next step after ultrasonography is USG guided FNAC. The problem with FNAC is it has got a lot of percentage of false negative and false positive. So it has a lot of errors. So it depends on an individual who is doing it. So ultrasonography, still you don't know. There's nothing in the oral cavity. There's nothing. It's inconclusive, your result of FNAC. The patient is on your head. Patient wants, doctor, what is happening? I'll start treatment. It is just growing. You will go in and do an excisional lymph node biopsy. You will open the neck. You will talk to your surgeon. He will go in and take a part of that node. All right. This will give a definitive. Still there is nothing. Send it for IHC. It will definitely give you a result. All right. So tumor markers, IHC is something higher than a biopsy. Biopsy is not helping you, slight review, you have changed the pathologist, you can go for all these things. Okay, grading. So this is the 8th edition classification, which you should all know now. Forget what you knew before. You just see this. They have included this depth, 5 millimeter depth now. So everything is about this depth now. 5 millimeter, less than 5 millimeter, 5 to 10 millimeter, less than 10 millimeter, or whatever. This is what is followed all over the world now. It is no more the kind of a Mughal Empire classification what we had before. So this has changed last year, so you have to follow this. And with respect to neck nodes, also they have added this extra nodal extension. So what is extra nodal extension? If you have a lymph node and it's a diseased lymph node, and the disease has gone into the capsule, and from the capsule it has come out, and it has caused the lymph nodes restricted mobility. So it becomes a extra nodal extension of the disease. The disease has come outside the node. Okay, all this will help you in planning your treatment, because patients who will have an extra nodal extension on histopathological resection report, not pre-surgery, okay, even if pre-surgery, they will require, most of the times, adjuvant therapy, either with chemo or radiation. So what is the primary strategy for prevention? Pick up these patients faster, do an early biopsy, refer them nicely. You tell these patients, usually patients with so-called red and white lesions, they should be very careful. Whenever they brush, they should see properly the size, whether it's increasing or reducing, because you can save a life. Trust me, you can save a life, you can save a family, you can save many people related to those people. What are the management modalities? You have surgery for the primary and the neck. You do a resection or a alveolar, what you call it, marginal mandibulectomy, or a resection. You can do laser. Laser is only for red and white and all this leukoplakia. We do not do laser for cancer. If you have a proper squamous cell carcinoma, laser is not indicated, because I want 5 millimeter, I want 1 centimeter depth. Lasers usually cut only till 2 to 4 millimeters. So it will be a failed surgery. So surgeon success in oral oncology is primarily with the margins which we get with the reports. All right. So radiation. When do you give radiation, doctor? Radiation or chemo is decided on histopathology report. All right. So if the patient is a high risk, it was a poorly differentiated carcinoma, it is a T2 tumor or T3 tumor with perineural invasion, with lymphovascular invasion, poorly differentiated, and probably and probably 1 or 2 nodes were positive. Once you remove these nodes and you send for histopathology, these are the patients which will require radiotherapy. Now, doctor, which patients require chemotherapy? Now, same scenario, T3, T4 lesions, which have a depth, more than 5 millimeters, 5 to 9 or more than. See, it is different again for different sub areas. So for tongue, say for example 9 millimeter or more than 5 millimeter, it's risky because it has more lymphatics. All right, so a lot of chances that it will metastasize. Or a patient has a lymphovascular invasion in any subsite, buccal mucosa, tongue or alveolus or palate, and patient had, and you have a positive margin, means whatever you have removed only less than 1 centimeter or even less than 5 millimeter. So less than 5 millimeter is positive, till 5 millimeter it's kind of adequate. There are different theories to that, but we usually keep 1 centimeter on being on a safer side. So if your margin is positive, this is one very good indication to give chemotherapy along with radiation. So this becomes your adjuvant therapy. All right. So in general, T1, T2 tumors are treated with surgery and reconstruction. Dr. Shakti Singh is a very good reconstructive surgeon. He will tell you all about. So these are indications. Please take a picture or whatever, you remember this. So positive margins, locally advanced T3, T4, high-grade perineural invasion, all this will be a part of a histopathology report which comes after surgery. So after understanding all this, you will send the patient for adjuvant therapy. So whether you give him radiation or chemo, it depends on the histopath report. Brachytherapy and all is outdated. Nobody usually does it. It's done at some centers. I just want to talk for 2 minutes on chemotherapy. There are different types of chemotherapy. We are, sometimes called and asked, okay, he's taking neoadjuvant chemotherapy. What is neoadjuvant? So in oral cancers, very few indications are there for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. All right, what are these indications? Tumors which you feel are borderline tumors, where you feel you cannot give a 1 centimeter margin and will be difficult to resect. These are the tumors which will require probably 2 to 3 cycles of chemotherapy. Probably it will reduce the tumor load. And then you resect according to the previous dimensions of the tumor, and it helps because it kinds of makes the field sterile. So there are very few indications for neoadjuvant chemotherapy in head and neck cancers. I mean, there are hardly any papers on it, but whatever papers are there, it is only for borderline cases. All right. So adjuvant is after surgery along with radiotherapy. So you add chemotherapy, it improves the overall prognosis of the patient on a long run. So neoadjuvant is the before starting a permanent therapy, which might be surgery or radiation, you give something upfront that becomes a neoadjuvant. So neoadjuvant is what you start before a definitive treatment plan. So it can be 2 cycles, 3 cycles to reduce the tumor, and then do surgery, and after surgery do radio and chemo again. So the final things, I just want to take 2 minutes probably last. So whom to refer and when to refer, very important. See, as soon as you have a biopsy report, talk to a person whom you feel is good enough to do the things, and just talk to him on the phone and take his help or her help and just follow up with him. So again, very important. Okay, don't refer your patients to people who are part-time surgeons or whatever. You should be totally involved with oncology full-time, day in, day out, to give the best results. Help patients who want to get operated. See, in Bombay, we get a lot of patients from Ahmedabad, Surat. They just somehow want to come here. Help them. Find out who's best there. Talk to that person on the phone. Take his appointment for verbal communication. He might be somebody who knows somebody. So help them to fix the appointments. Follow up with them and try to come. Obviously not outside the state, but if you're taking him to a local surgeon, go with the patient for the first time. It helps the patient. It gives them motivation to take the treatment. All right.